They got some pretty nice ones right there. I might be completely wrong about all these. What's up, Lazy Dog fam? Hope all y'all are having a wonderful day. It is Thursday, June 20th here in South Georgia, and it's finally time to collect the data and look at the results of our healing experiment that we've got going on with this one row of potatoes left behind me. So on today's video, we're going to talk about why we did this experiment, the perceived benefits of healing versus why some people say it's not necessary. We're going to look at the results on a per plant basis and then compile them from the healed and non-healed portion of the row. So all our taters have been dug with the exception of this one row of Sharp O'Meara right here. These were planted around mid-February. Here it is, a little past mid-June, so these have been in the ground approximately 120 days. This is a late maturing variety. We knew it was going to be the last to be harvested, and it's a really tough variety. It's got some resistance to late blight, I believe, and man, it just hangs in there. Still a little bit of green growth on those leaves, but I believe it's time to go ahead and dig these. So for our experimental setup, when we put all this together back in mid-February, obviously we're using the same variety here to kind of control things on that end. We've got a 30-foot row. We basically cut the row in half. We healed half of the row 2 times. The other half of the row didn't get any soil added to those plants. The whole row has received the same amount of fertilizer. It's been side dressed 2 times with coop grow, and then obviously all the plants being in the same row, they've all received the same amount of water. So there's our dividing line right in the middle of the row. We can see the first half of the row there that was healed. We can see the second half of the row that was not healed. And at this stage in the game, we can't really see any significant differences in the size of the plants. The plants kind of all look the same size. With this non-healed row, we are seeing a decent amount of these taters being exposed to the sun, which was something I was worried about a little bit. We'll address that in a minute. Now before we start digging, let's back up just a minute and talk about why we wanted to do this experiment in the first place. And it has to do with the fact that over the years we've had a lot of people comment on our tater healing videos and tell us that what we're doing is not necessary at all. It's not going to improve harvest, not going to increase your yields. So I thought there's no better way to test that than to do our own little experiment here and see what the data says. Taters are really easy to do experiments with, and we've done several tater experiments in previous years. One year we did an experiment comparing healing taters with straw or adding straw around the plants versus traditionally adding soil around the plants. And what we found was the plants healed with soil did a lot better than the ones healed with straw. Of course, that makes sense, right? There's a lot more nutrients in soil than there are in straw. But anyways, back to this particular experiment, let's go through the perceived benefits of healing versus why someone says it's not necessary at all. So number one, healing tater plants is going to give you some nice in-row weed suppression because you're kind of smothering out those weeds that may come up in between the plants along the row. And it did for us on the healed portion of the row in the beginning. But since these plants have been in the ground so long, 120 days, we still had weeds popping up, especially in the last month or so. We had to go hand pull weeds in the healed and non-healed portion of the row. So the in-row weed suppression benefit was early on, but we had to pull probably the same amount of weeds on both sides of the row in the end. So reason number two is plant support. So healing those tater plants is going to help keep them upright as opposed to just falling over on the soil when they get to a certain height. And we did get better plant support on the healed portion of this row versus the non-healed portion. You can't tell now because all the plants have fallen over as they're starting to die back. Reason number three, I believe that healing promotes better root development and also more access to nutrients. Assuming you have some nutrients in your soil, you have relatively healthy soil. When you mound that soil up around those tater plants, they form more roots and they have access to all those nutrients in your soil. Number 4, healing taters keeps them from being exposed to the sun as they develop. So when taters are exposed to the sun, they start turning green and they can become quite toxic if they get green enough. So we don't want our taters to turn green. We want to keep them covered until we harvest them. That way we can use all the taters that we grow. And as I showed you earlier, we've definitely seen the benefits of healing just from that sun exposure aspect already. The non-healed row has a lot of taters that are now exposed to the sun. I haven't messed with them, I've just left them there. The healed row, there might be 1 or 2 that are poking out a little bit, but most of them are still underneath the soil. And then the 5th reason, the most important reason for the purposes of this video, I believe that healing taters is going to give you better yields. If you've ever grown taters and see how they are formed, you've got your seed piece and then your taters are formed above that seed piece. I believe having more soil around those plants is going to give you greater yields, more taters, and bigger taters. Now we're about to see if that's true or not, but just kind of give you an idea of where I'm coming from as far as why I've always healed my plants. So those are the arguments for healing. Now there are some people that say healing isn't necessary at all, especially when it comes to determinate potato varieties, and this can confuse a lot of people. As I've told you before, all taters are determinate down here. We have early maturing varieties like the Huckleberry Gold that we harvested first. We have late maturing varieties like the Sharp O'Meara, which we're going to harvest today. But it gets so hot down here, no taters are going to grow indeterminately. Up north, Sharp O'Meara will grow indeterminately, and you'll see people doing them in those tater towers where they just keep adding soil to those plants as they grow. So the whole determinate versus indeterminate argument is kind of thrown out the window down here because they're all determinate. We just have early maturing versus late maturing. And then you'll have other people say healing isn't necessary at all. You just got to plant your taters 6 or 8 inches deep. And I get that in a raised bed or a container. That's pretty easy to do because your soil is nice and soft. It's not really feasible for most folks to dig a 6 to 8 inch trench in an in-ground garden plot. Even though I've got sandy soils, it's pretty tough to dig a furrow or trench that deep. Usually about 4 inches deep. It's pretty easy to dig. 6 to 8 inches, you start getting into some harder soil. So a deep furrow like that is not very practical in an in-ground garden plot. Yes, easy to do in raised beds or containers. All right, so now it's time to collect some data, and here's how we're going to do this. We're going to look at the yields by weight for each individual plant here. Although we've got this row cut right down the middle, half healed, half not healed, there's a chance we may have 1 or 2 more plants in one group versus the other. So I think it's best to look at it on a per plant basis, and then we'll compile the results from each portion of the row. So I've got my little kitchen scale here to weigh the taters from each individual plant. Yeah, I know this is not as scientific as using a digital scale, but I think we'll still be fine, still be able to get some good data here. Now I'm not going to bore you with the harvesting and weighing of each individual plant here, but I will show you one from each row, and then I'll go over the results from all the data. So let's see what we got here with our first healed tater plant. Nice little harvest there. Not any massive ones. There's a rotten one there. That won't count. A lot of times these plants at the end of the row aren't always the most productive. Got a few more rotten ones in there. But some decent ones too. And I think that's all for that plant there. That's where the second plant starts. So we won't dig that one right this second. So then we put all those on the scale here, and I'm probably going to use ounces, even though grams is probably a little more scientific. So we got 1 pound, 6 ounces, call it 22 ounces for that first healed plant. Now let's dig a non-healed plant here and see what we got. This one here is pretty much dried up to a crisp. So that's plant number 2. This would be plant number 1 here. They got some pretty nice ones right there. I might be completely wrong about all these. Oh, look at those there. The small ones, but a few bigger ones than we got on that first healed plant there. I think that's all of them. Don't want to leave any in the dirt, even those tiny ones we want to get. So that first not healed plant there significantly outperformed our first healed plant. We can see we've got 2 pounds 4 ounces, so a total of 36 ounces on that one. So I'll keep going through all these, writing down the weight in ounces for every single plant. I'll put all the taters from the healed row in my dog's bucket. I'll put all the taters from the non-healed portion of the row in the Home Depot bucket. That way we can keep them separate. Once I have all the data, I'll go in my office, compile all that, and I'll come back, show you the results. All right, so I got them all weighed. The healed portion of the rows in the dog's bucket, unhealed in the Home Depot bucket. That may look significant, but we won't know until we run some numbers. Got all the data written down right here. Did have one more plant in the healed row or healed portion versus the non-healed portion. Looks like it's trying to rain on me. So let me go inside and run these numbers. All right, so I've got all the data analyzed right here, and I'll throw it up on the screen in just a minute. But before I do, a couple things to mention here. This wind is blowing like crazy. We did have some rotten taters in the row. There were some rotten taters on the healed portion of the row and some rotten taters on the unhealed portion of the row. So what I did, if I could still pick it up, I weighed it. I then chunked it, but it did get weighed if I could still pick it up. Maybe it just had a little soft spot on it. Some of them were completely mushed, couldn't weigh those. So that's how we dealt with the rotten taters. And then, as I showed you earlier, we also had some in the unhealed row that were kind of on the soil surface there and had turned green. I weighed all the green taters as well, but that's just something to kind of keep in mind. We probably got more usable taters from the healed row because there weren't near as many that were exposed to the sun. Also important to note that the healed taters were much easier to dig than the unhealed taters were because we had a nice mound of soft soil there. A lot easier to dig those that had been healed. All right, so now let's throw the data up on the screen here, and those of you who are statisticians and want to play around with those numbers, feel free to pause it and copy those down and do your own analysis here. So we had 17 plants in the healed portion of the row, only 16 plants in the non-healed portion of the row. That's why I wanted to look at this on a per plant basis, because the number of plants could have been a little bit different even though we split the row right down the middle. Some of the pieces of taters that we planted may not have sprouted. So you can see by looking at this data here, our greatest harvest for a single plant was plant number 12 on the healed row. We got 78 ounces of taters from that one plant, almost 5 pounds of taters from a single plant. We also had some pretty poorly performing plants. A couple of the plants in that non-healed row kind of on the end there, one we got 3 ounces from, one we got 6 ounces from. Now, if we look at the total weight for each half of the row, for the healed half of the row, we harvested a little over 35 pounds, and for the not healed half of the row, we harvested just under 25 pounds. Now, we planted 5 pounds of seed potatoes in that row, fair to assume 2.5 pounds for the healed portion and 2.5 pounds for the not healed portion. So regardless of whether we healed the potatoes or not, we still hit or got really close to that 10 times multiple that we're always trying to at least hit when we grow taters. We got above the 10 times multiple on the healed portion of the row, just barely under it on the unhealed portion of the row. Now let's look at the average yield and weight per plant, because I think this is what's really important. So for the healed portion of the row, we had an average of 33.47 ounces per plant, or 2.09 pounds. And for the non-healed portion of the row, we had an average of 24.81 ounces per plant, or 1.55 pounds. So just on the raw data alone, without any manipulation of the data, we can see here we got about a ½ pound more per plant on the healed portion of the row than we did on the unhealed portion of the row. Now, I know some of you out there are thinking, well, that one plant in the healed portion of the row that gave you 78 ounces is skewing your data some. And I would agree with that. So what I did was calculate the standard deviation for each group, and then I removed any data points that were 2 standard deviations above the mean or below the mean. Now, I know I just confused a bunch of people from Alabama, but what we're basically doing here is removing the outliers in our data set. So after doing that standard deviation analysis, it told me that I should remove that one data point for the healed row where we got 78 ounces from one plant. And so I'll show the data set here with that one outlier removed. So what does all this mean? Well, there are several different methods out there for determining statistical significance. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you that these two groups are statistically significant from one another. What I will tell you is that we harvested about a ½ pound more per plant when we healed taters versus when we didn't heal them. Now we still got pretty good yields on both halves of the row, which tells me that you can still hit that 10 times multiple without doing any healing at all. But it also tells me that you may get into that 12 to 14 times multiple range if you heal your tater plants. So it's up to you to determine if healing is worth it or not. Is it worth the effort of going out there and pulling soil up around those plants to get that extra ½ pound of taters per plant? Or is it not worth it? You'd rather just stick them in the ground, risk a few being exposed to the sun, and roll with your 10 times multiple and be happy with it. Now for me personally, I'm going to continue to heal my tater plants and try to get that extra ½ pound of production, but I completely understand why someone may choose not to heal them, just plant them on flat ground, roll with it, get their 10 times multiple, and be good with that. So I hope you enjoyed seeing that experiment come to fruition there, and we tried to do that as scientifically sound as possible, as much as we could in a backyard garden setting like we have here. And let me know in the comments below what you think about those results. Are they significant to you, or is there not enough difference there for you to justify healing your taters? And as always, you can find that Coop Grow fertilizer that we used exclusively on our taters on our website at lazydogfarm.com. And if you missed our start to finish raised bed tater video where we walk you through the process of planting, taking care of the plants, and then harvesting, you can check that out right here. Really good comprehensive video on growing taters in containers or raised beds. So check that out, and we'll see you next time right here at Lazy Dog Farm.